Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here, and I'm trying my best not to make an overly negative video today, but I can't help but notice lately that the quality of mythic items in the Elder Scrolls Online have seemed to steadily decline for the past few years now. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and then Update 48 dropped on the PTS earlier this week and gave us this. Yes, this is the new mythic item for ESO in Update 48. Another heavy attack focused set with mediocre stats and benefits behind it. Now, I'll dive more into this in a minute, but I think it's also a good point in ESO's lifetime to talk about mythic items as a system. Which mythic items actually work for players and which don't, and specifically how those could be improved. And don't get me wrong, I do really like mythics and antiquities as a system in ESO. Even though this video may sound negative at first, the goal is to provide feedback that the ESO dev team can actually use. So let them know what you think down in the comments section as well, and specifically, what are you looking for with mythic items? So just as a quick overview of the mythic system in ESO, these are essentially the S-tier rewards you can get from the antiquity system, which first appeared in the Greymoor chapter. S-tier, I guess, is a little bit subjective, but to me, that's the implied value when you call something, quote, mythic quality. These items should be some of the best that you can get in the game. That's what mythic means to me. And for a while, that was actually true. Some of the first mythic items in ESO were even so powerful that they had to get nerfed soon after release, definitely walking that thin line between fun and rewarding versus pay to win. And that's okay. I mean, Malakith's Band of Brutality was one of those first mythic items that got heavily used as a burst set in PvP and had to be tuned down over time. Eventually, this set ended up doing less upfront damage, but you also had mythic items that were more niche and supported different and more unique playstyles or functions as well. A perfect example of that was the Ring of the Wild Hunt, which all it did was increase your speed so you could use it for questing or for gathering materials, which was a great addition to the game at the time and not overly game-breaking on its own. Shortly after those, though, came the Markarth DLC, and with it, the Ring of the Pale Order mythic, which was by far the best mythic at that time and still is one of the best to this day. The Pale Order Ring gives you strong passive healing when you deal any type of damage, and it opened up basically every class in the game to be able to solo content extremely well. Now, this just happened to drop at the same time as ESO's next solo arena called Badashran Hollows, which was great planning by the development team to release those two features around the same time. And as I said, this is still one of the top mythics in the game, especially for solo players due to the passive healing, and really showcased, I feel, how mythics should function in ESO. Not only could they be powerful one-piece item sets, but they could also empower specific types of players or types of gameplay. In this case, Pale Order made all solo builds much, much better. Now, players had already been tinkering with solo builds for a while in ESO, but a few classes like the Templar and the Sorcerer tended to dominate those solo build metas because their class kits just had so much more healing and defensive options built in, with skills like Puncturing Sweep, obviously, and then Critical Surge on the Sorcerer. And while solo builds on other classes were possible, they weren't nearly as good as on those two classes. But that's where Ring of the Pale Order really changed everything, unlocking great passive healing no matter what skills you ran or what class you had access to. So again, taking a niche concept, in this case solo builds, and making it more attainable or more optimized for all the classes in the game, this showcased exactly what mythics could be used for, in my opinion, to make the game a lot more fun and interesting for players. So Pale Order Ring was a huge win for mythics as a system in ESO. After that, mythic quality became hit or miss as the dev team looked for new gaps to fill. There was Harpooner's Waiting Kilt released in the Blackwood chapter. That was quite popular for a while for DPS builds, giving a stackable crit chance and crit damage bonus. There was also Gaze of Sithis, which I also liked for making builds more survivable, adding a ton of extra armor and health, but nothing really changed the game in the way that the Pale Order Ring did until the following year when the Oakensoul Ring mythic launched in the High Isle chapter. Oakensoul was by far the most controversial and powerful mythic added to the game at that time. I'm sure if you're watching this channel that you know exactly what the Oakensoul Ring is. It adds a ton of useful major and minor buffs to your build, but also restricts you to using only one skill bar, not being able to bar swap or use additional abilities. And much like Pale Order Ring incentivized solo builds to grow and branch out beyond just a few meta setups, The Oakensoul Ring then encouraged the idea of one-bar builds to get even more popular. Now, before the Oakensoul Ring existed, one-bar builds were actually a thing. I had a few here on the channel before then, and while they were definitely fun and very simple, letting you just focus on the gameplay more than anything else, they really weren't that optimal for pushing harder content because you missed out on so many buffs and stats. Oakensoul completely changed that though, and at release, some one-bar builds were actually outperforming full-on two-bar setups because of how strong this mythic was. And of course, that got balanced over time as well, and many of Oakensoul's stats got pulled back or rebalanced. But again, what made Oakensoul highly desirable wasn't just the stats, but just like the Pale Order Ring, Oakensoul helped to promote and even buff a unique play style and make it more fun and viable for a large group of players, in this case, one-bar builds. So this again highlights what I think is really great about mythic items as a system for ESO. It's that these mythics can make less popular or optimized ways to play the game actually really good. With Ring of the Pale Order, the popularity of solo builds shot up drastically because you could now solo hard content, but there was also a downside. You couldn't be healed by your allies, so this wouldn't be overly game-breaking for group content or leaderboards. Same thing with the Oakensoul Ring. Before, one-bar builds were incredibly niche, and those who wanted that playstyle had to deal with having very less optimal stats. But after the Oakensoul Ring, those stats were brought up much higher, making one-bar builds viable, except maybe the top 5% of content that actually requires meta builds and setups. Being restricted to using just one skill bar wasn't even really a downside for those players either, because that's exactly how they wanted to play in the first place. And again, with balancing, Oakensoul builds do not exceed what full 2-bar builds can do, so it is fairly balanced. Now, I'll fast forward to my next favorite mythic item from 2023, the Velothi or Mage's Amulet. This increased damage done to monsters by 15%, also giving minor force and bonus penetration, but at the cost of light and heavy attack damage being reduced. Again, this was a perfect mythic for a particular niche playstyle. In this case, the Arcanist and the Templar and other builds who focused on channeled effects. This was really best for those builds because you were channeling for so long that you would end up doing less light and heavy attacks on those builds anyways, and so it really made sense. Basically, the Arcanist Beam build or the Templar Sweep were all directly supported by this mythic, and they got extra utility without a huge downside. So this was another great all-around mythic for that particular playstyle. However, since we've had the Velothi mythic, we haven't seen mythics hit in really the same ways as before, and that's where I see the quality of mythic items in ESO starting to decline at that point. This year, for example, we had Rakat's Void Mantle, which does appear great on paper. However, I think it does have some confusing issues built into both its stats and its leads. The heavy attack bonus here is nice for sure. I mean, 50% is a huge bonus, which can stack with other item sets, champion points, off balance, and the empower buff, making for an incredibly strong heavy attack build. But the rest of the set just doesn't make a lot of sense. First of all, why would you want to restore resources on just your light attacks if you are a heavy attack focused build? That is actually kind of awkward and hard to manage. Are players supposed to weave light attacks followed by a heavy attack, followed by another light attack? Actually, the optimal way to play a heavy attack build is to always heavy attack between skills for maximum damage, light attacking as little as possible. So forcing light attacks into a heavy attack build for sustain doesn't make a lot of sense. And then taking away the resource restoration from heavy attacks is an even bigger downside for this item. Most players enjoy heavy attack builds because they don't have to worry about resource sustain. That's kind of the point or one of the main benefits of a heavy attack build. It's a huge downside, and this doesn't match the downside of the other successful mythics that we talked about, like the Oakensoul Ring or the Pale Order Ring, where the downside was kind of small when it was focused within the right playstyle. Like those downsides made sense for that style of build. Instead, the downside for Rakat's Void Mantle directly opposes the playstyle of the item set. I mean, sure, you can still stack enough sustain to get over it, but it just makes the playstyle more restrictive and punishing, and it's not really fun. Also, I have to say that several leads for this mythic dropping in trials is incredibly ironic, considering the fact that many trials groups don't really accept heavy attack builds, into their raids. This playstyle is still a little bit frowned on by some endgame player groups, so forcing you to complete a full-on trial to get the leads for this mythic, when heavy attack builds are basically considered a bridge to endgame builds. Not really sure what the devs were thinking there. Like, you need an endgame build to get your beginner build to be better. Something is just a little bit off with this entire mythic. But that does lead us to ESO's most recent mythic coming in update 48, which I talked about at the start of this video. This is Huntsman's War Mask. First, it's another heavy attack set. I mean, really, it's great that the devs are putting in more heavy attack sets to the game to support that playstyle, but everything that's been added for heavy attacks never really compares to Sergeant's Mail. But let's see. I mean, let's look at the stats more closely. When you get a heavy attack on a target, you place a mark on that target for 20 seconds. While marked, you deal 8% more damage to that target, and then 4% less damage to other targets. So lots of issues here. I mean, the 8% damage for the mythic does seem underwhelming, but especially since that damage is confined to one single target. You would never use this in PvE, for example, because you're frequently fighting multiple targets at once. And the strength of a heavy attack build using Lightning Staff specifically is that your heavy attack hits multiple targets and deals damage to all of them at once. The resource return on this is also not great, considering the cooldown is 10 seconds, and again, heavy attacks already restore resources. Honestly, at best, this feels more like an Overland set bonus and not a mythic item. And when you compare it to other mythics like the Pale Order or even Velothi Mage, Amulet, there's nothing transformational here at all. This desperately not only needs a buff, but I think a complete rework, and it does showcase the struggle that ZOS has had this year with creating new mythic items for the game. If they are so focused on heavy attack sets, which they do seem to be recently, then this mythic specifically should help support the main downside of heavy attack builds right now. And it's not damage. You've already got the Ratcat's Void Mantle mythic for that. But I'm talking about the biggest downside I see with heavy attack builds right now that a mythic actually could fix is that the only viable heavy attack build is locked to the Lightning Staff weapon type. There's a reason why 95 or maybe 99% of heavy attack builds only use one weapon in ESO. But that's specifically because Lightning Staff, again, can hit multiple targets at once, so it's good in all forms of content. There currently is no heavy attack dagger build or heavy attack bow build or even heavy attack restoration staff build on my channel because they don't damage multiple targets and are therefore much less optimal. So knowing that restriction and knowing that is a huge limitation for players who want to enjoy heavy attack builds, why not create a mythic that lets your heavy attacks for other weapons deal some percent of splash damage to nearby targets, just like the Lightning Staff does? That's one where I would actually not mind the downside here of heavy attacks not restoring resources. A negative effect like that would actually be worth it for me if I could actually branch out and do some interesting heavy attack builds with dual daggers or a heavy bow attack or a heavy restoration staff attack actually damaging more than a single target. That would be a pretty game-changing mythic that players could actually use and want to pick up. But to summarize, mythics in ESO used to be great because they made niche playstyles more viable and mainstream by heavily buffing them. But this didn't necessarily take away from other playstyles, and it didn't raise the ceiling, it only raised the floor for those niche playstyles. Pale Order, Oakensoul, and Velothi are great examples of that, and I'd love to see more of that rather than this new mythic, which doesn't seem to add anything new to the game and definitely is not worthy of the title of mythic. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, and thanks again for watching. Hey everybody, just a quick note that we are still rolling out members-only builds and guides for our Tier 2 channel members here called the Elite Squad, including our updated unkillable stamina sorcerer build, the Arcane Archer. This one is a longtime favorite here on the channel, mixing powerful bow attacks with magical spells and yes, lots of pets, for basically a stamina version of the Zookeeper playstyle. Plus, this build is now updated for subclassing with even more damage and even more pets. But that's just one of dozens of members-only builds and guides you can unlock when you become a channel member. We have the Stamina Necromancer Death Knight build, which combines massive AoE damage, healing, and sustain. The Golden Saint build for the Stamina Templar, which combines fire and holy magic. And the unique Druid build, which is also incredibly strong and a ton of fun to play. All of these builds, of course, use subclassing now to create truly unique and off-meta playstyles that basically feel like you're playing a completely new class in the Elder Scrolls Online. If you'd like to support the channel, it really is the best way to do that because you get a truckload of bonus content, not to mention early access and members-only Discord. But just make sure to select the Elite Squad option if you're interested, and to get started, click the join button down below or click on the membership link in the description to see our full list of members-only builds and guides. Huge shout out as always to our channel members who make HTM possible. I could not do what I do without you, so thanks again. Thanks to all of you for watching this video, and I will see you around in the next one.